When asked about your favorite food, it's almost guaranteed something comes to mind. Cheese pizza is all I think about. The joy of eating might be just as important as the nutrients on your plate.
So today we're diving into a very delicious topic. We're talking vitamin P, but the P is for pleasure. So we have 9 News health expert Dr. Payal Kohli joining us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Pizza for me as well.
Yes, vitamin P, pizza.
Everybody needs some of that. I love that. So let's talk. What is vitamin P and why do we need it?
So vitamin pleasure, it is an essential vitamin, and we need to have some pleasure in our life. And our senses, all of our senses, our taste, our smell, our vision, they evolved to actually program us to give us these reward signals from our environment. And if we don't have these reward signals from our environment, it messes with our physical health, our mental health. And when it comes to food, it can actually change the way that our body absorbs foods, the nutrients, even how your body reacts to the food that you eat.
Lauren is very disciplined in her diet, and we were literally talking about this today. I'm like, girl, what is your thing? She said hot sauce. So, to each their own. Why are we wired to get pleasure from food?
So think about how we evolved, right? We were hunter-gatherers out in the wild, and we needed to basically make our brain like the fact that we ate food. So we evolved to respond positively to calories, because calories help us to build muscle and, sustain ourselves. We respond positively to sweetness. So sweetness in our brain is associated with safety, because again, those calorie-rich foods that are full of carbohydrates give us energy, and we respond positively to salt and fat. So our brain actually triggers dopamine, which is that feel-good chemical when we eat these. It also triggers endorphins, which is another type of feel-good chemical. And then our brain does something called emotional memory. When those feel-good chemicals get triggered, it makes that circuit stronger. So the next time we eat, it triggers a bigger burst of those feel-good chemicals. So in a way, it almost gets us sort of addicted to those sweet, salty, and high-fat foods.
That is so interesting. So we talked about what it was like back then. How has this changed in modern times?
So think about what we eat: ice cream, pizza, potato chips. So the modern diet has sort of hijacked our circuit. The circuit was intended to protect us, but the modern diet has made it so that we end up now emotional eating whenever we have, anxiety or stress or fear or anything. We reach for these types of foods because they trigger those chemicals in our brain, and it actually can be maladaptive for us because it makes us gain weight, have excess calories, increase risk of blood pressure and heart disease, and so on and so forth.
So is eating food that gives you pleasure actually good for you?
It's amazing for you. In fact, I want every single one of us to start being mindful about how we eat, because it's not only good for our physical health, it's good for mental health. So when we eat food that gives us pleasure, it reduces levels of cortisol, which is that stress hormone, which raises our sugar, raises our inflammation, what have you. It actually changes the way the food is absorbed, so we get more out of the food that we eat. More vitamins, it's digested in a better way. And overall, they say people who are aware of their food and eat mindfully actually live longer, so their longevity is better, and they're less likely to overeat because you're being very mindful and thoughtful about how you're eating your food rather than kind of mindlessly shoving it in. I tend to eat at a computer, while I'm working, and I'm not being mindful. And so I either end up overeating or eating too fast or not chewing my food enough. So really starting to say, okay, meal times are a time when we carve out, 10 minutes, sit and think about the taste, think about the texture, think about the flavor. And if there's any bad taste in the food, like bitter taste or sour taste, those are actually intended to turn us off the food. They release those bad chemicals in our brain.
So really just being present and intentional about your meals. We talked about the physical benefits. What are the mental benefits?
So eating, mindfully, of course, makes us feel less stressed out, makes us feel happier. But think about eating as a whole. It's a ritual, right? So they've looked at these Mediterranean populations like Greek people who sit together, eat as a family, and think about food almost as part of their behavior. They live longer, they do better, they sleep better, they have less inflammation, they have less depression and anxiety. So really changing how we think about meal times rather than eating a burrito at a traffic light. We need to sit down and think about this not just as self-care time, but as a time to bond with other people over shared food.
This is why I'm so protective of my family's dinner time together. I really am. It really means a lot to me that we sit together, we take our time for so many reasons. Talk a little bit about the difference between emotional eating and pleasure eating.
So this can be tricky, right? Because
Yes.
that circuit gets triggered with both of them. So we have to be thinking about how that gets triggered. So the most important difference is intention. Why are you eating the food? So if you're eating the food for the taste, the texture, you pick up an apple from an apple orchard after you've gone apple picking and eat that, that is the right type of eating. That's the vitamin P, the pleasure eating. If you're eating it to deal with positive or negative emotions, again, because of stress or because you're bored or because you want something to do, that's the negative. And then how you respond to the food afterwards. So after you've eaten, yes, you'll feel satiety, you'll feel those dopamine, but do you feel guilt or shame? And if you do, then that's a negative pleasure. That's emotional eating. Whereas if you feel happy and fulfilled, that's the vitamin P that you need.
So what I'm gathering is more pizza and more buffalo chicken.
Everything in moderation. It's like if I have a slice, I'm like, that was amazing. If I eat the whole pizza pie, then we've had a problem.
But you're absolutely right. It's okay to eat some of those high-fat, high-sugar foods, but just keep it really, really in moderation, because otherwise you keep training your brain to crave those and you're starting down a spiral. But if you're engaged with that pizza, you're engaged with those buffalo wings, you're really getting pleasure out of it. You're not just doing it because you had a bad day at work or something. That's a great way to think about your food.
And this is advice that we can all use, because this is something that we all do every day, 3 times a day, you know?
We're engaged with our food. I love it.